What if the smartest decision the Indiana Fever made all offseason wasn't some massive blockbuster trade or signing a star player to a lucrative maximum deal? What if it was something way more subtle, almost invisible to everyone outside the front office? A low-key addition that nobody truly appreciated until one brutal night in Indianapolis revealed exactly why management understood the assignment. That night, when the Golden State Valkyries rolled into town with aggressive intentions, one player stepped onto the court and showed the entire league that the Fever were no longer going to be pushed around. Her name is Maisha Hines Allen, and her performance that evening might just be the most critical turning point for this franchise all season. But before we dive into why this moment mattered so much, we need to understand what actually happened on that court and what it exposed about the way teams have been targeting Indiana's stars. Subscribe and hit that like button, because this gets way more intense than just one heated moment. The Golden State Valkyries arrived in Indianapolis with a very specific game plan, and they didn't hide it. From the opening tip-off, they locked onto Indiana's perimeter playmakers like they were surgically attached, turning every screen into a physical wrestling match and treating every drive toward the basket as an excuse to throw elbows and bodies around. Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement. This wasn't standard competitive defense that you see most nights in the WNBA. This was calculated, systematic, and clearly designed with a single purpose in mind: physically and mentally exhaust Indiana's star players until someone either broke down or reacted badly enough to get ejected. The officials decided to let the players play that night, and the Valkyries viewed that whistle-free approach as permission to keep pushing boundaries further and further. They kept testing the limits, seeing how much they could get away with before someone finally snapped back. The holding, the jersey pulling, the body checks, the forearms to the chest, the wrist grabs during off-ball cuts, it was all part of a coordinated strategy. Every contact had intent behind it. Every physicality escalation was deliberate. Tiffany Hayes was the primary instigator, and it wasn't even close. Watch the game tape and her fingerprints are all over the aggressive approach. Hayes spent all 40 minutes grabbing wrists, pulling shirts during pick and rolls, turning every offensive cut into a grueling grapple, and making her presence felt on every single play Caitlin Clark touched the basketball. She wasn't playing standard competitive defense that night. She was executing a tactic built on a very specific belief that nobody on the Indiana roster would fight back hard enough to make it not worth doing. Here's the thing that makes this story so critical to understanding where the WNBA is right now. For the past few years, this approach has been an open secret across the league. Star guards have been frequently targeted by opponents who test exactly how much physical punishment they can dish out before the referees actually step in and start calling fouls. Teams have figured out that if they're clever about it, if they do it consistently, if they wear down their opponent gradually rather than with one obvious flagrant foul, they can get away with a lot more than the rulebook technically allows. The Valkyries clearly believed they could use that exact same playbook in Indianapolis on this particular night. They had probably watched Indiana games, identified this vulnerability, studied how other teams had attacked it, and came into town thinking they had the perfect formula. They were confident. They had done this to other teams and gotten away with it, but they made one critical miscalculation. They didn't account for what Indiana's front office had quietly assembled in the offseason. The physical assault escalated as the first half went on. By halftime, the toll was visible and undeniable. There were scratches running down arms, marks visible on faces, players checking in with their own bench to see if they were actually bleeding. The Valkyries' physicality wasn't just contact, it was damage. Sophie Cunningham, who has evolved into a vital and beloved enforcer on this Indiana team, took such a beating on the perimeter during that first half that she went live on social media right after the game ended. She pointed the camera straight at her own face and displayed the scratches she had sustained throughout the night, making a joke about looking like Harry Potter and everything. But underneath that humor was a serious point that Sophie was making. Teams are targeting Indiana. Opponents smell blood in the water, and somebody needs to respond in a way that makes them think twice before trying it again. That level of accountability and that willingness to publicly acknowledge what's happening, that's exactly what Sophie has brought to this team since she arrived, and it's a huge part of why the fan base loves her so much. Yet even those scratches and injuries and that post-game message weren't the moment that completely shifted the entire momentum of the game. The real turning point came just before the halftime buzzer sounded, during a battle for a rebound deep in the paint. Jantel Lavender wound up and swung an elbow that came dangerously close to connecting directly with Caitlin Clark's face. This wasn't some accidental box out or two players getting naturally tangled up while competing for position on the floor. This was a deliberate elbow swing with clear intent behind it, the kind of play that could have caused serious injury. Clark refused to back down. She didn't flinch, didn't run away, didn't look to the refs hoping they would protect her. She stood her ground and responded. The benches cleared instantly. Players from both teams rushed towards center court, and for a few highly intense moments, it genuinely felt like the entire arena was about to erupt into complete chaos. The energy shifted completely. Everyone in the building knew something had changed. And that was the exact moment when everything that Indiana's management had been planning came to fruition. That was when Maisha Hines Allen delivered exactly what the front office had envisioned when they made the decision to bring her in. When those benches cleared and the situation escalated in front of the entire crowd, Maisha Hines Allen didn't jog onto the court. She didn't approach the situation cautiously or try to de-escalate things with a calm hand. She charged into the picture like an absolute freight train, moving with purpose and intensity. The moment she got there, she established herself directly between Caitlin Clark and the entire Golden State team. She made it undeniably, unmistakably clear to every single player on the Valkyries roster that anyone looking to escalate this situation further, anyone thinking about making another move against their superstar, would have to go through her first. This wasn't theater. This wasn't some performative moment for the crowd. This was a statement delivered in real time, one that resonated through both locker rooms and throughout the entire league. The second highlights started circulating online. Coaches stepped in to separate everyone before anything more escalated, and the officials eventually handed out double technical fouls to both Caitlin Clark and Jantel Lavender. As both squads walked back to their respective locker rooms heading into the break, the point had been definitively made. The Indiana Fever were no longer going to sit back and let their star players get targeted by opposing teams. Hines had drawn a line in the sand, and nobody on the Golden State roster seemed particularly eager to cross it for the remainder of the game. To truly understand why this specific moment was so pivotal, you have to look at Maisha Hines Allen's background and career trajectory. She secured a championship with the Washington Mystics back in 2019, which tells you everything you need to know about her mentality and her ability to perform when stakes are highest. She's earned all WNBA honors, which means she's been recognized as one of the elite players at her position year after year. Throughout her entire career, she's carved out her identity by handling the grueling, unglamorous tasks that many forwards actively avoid. She fights for position in crowded areas of the paint. She hunts for rebounds on every single shot, regardless of how physical things get. She delivers screens so impactful that opposing players genuinely feel them multiple possessions later. When an opposing player takes a shot at one of her team's top stars, Hines doesn't glance over at the bench looking for her coach's permission to respond. She doesn't wait for a coaching staff signal or try to read the room. She simply reacts, and she reacts with the intensity of someone who has been preparing for exactly that moment her entire career. That kind of competitive mindset, that instinct to protect, cannot be taught in a training camp or developed through video sessions. Players either possess it naturally or they don't, and Maisha Hines Allen has displayed it from the very start of her professional career. What's genuinely amazing is that her reputation across the entire league is so well established that even opponents who have clashed with her in the past understand where the boundaries are. They know not to push her too far because they've either experienced her response directly or they've seen what happens to players who do. There's a famous video clip from a few years back where Sophie Cunningham, now her teammate, actually went nose-to-nose with Hines Allen during an intense playoff game. If you study that footage carefully and really pay attention to the other players on the floor, you'll notice something funny and telling. Every single other player on the court tries to distance themselves from that altercation. Nobody wants any part of a fight with Maisha Hines Allen. They're moving away, they're backing up, they're staying out of it completely. The fact that Sophie Cunningham was one of the rare individuals willing to challenge her directly tells you something crucial about Sophie's own internal grit and competitive fire. It's the reason why those two together now, wearing the same jersey, form such an absolutely intimidating pair on the court. Just picture the team meetings when Indiana's front office realized they were bringing these two forces together. The rest of the league honestly deserves hazard pay for having to face them. But here's what makes this pairing even more significant beyond just the intimidation factor. When you have two players with that level of physical and mental toughness, protecting each other and protecting your franchise player, you've fundamentally changed the calculus for every opponent. Teams can't just target Caitlin Clark anymore and expect to get away with it. They can't play that physical blueprint that worked against Indiana last season. Now there are immediate, real-world consequences built directly into the roster. Opponents used to think, we'll rough up their star, tire her out, maybe get her frustrated enough that she makes mistakes. Now they have to think, if we do that, we're dealing with Hines, we're dealing with Sophie, and we're dealing with a team that's made it clear they will absolutely respond. That's not just a basketball change. That's a psychological shift in how Indiana positions itself in the league. And that shift started the moment Hines charged into that situation with the Valkyries. But understanding why management made this move in the first place requires looking at a bigger picture that extends far beyond one moment. The Indiana Fever's primary challenge entering the offseason wasn't a lack of elite talent. That was never the issue. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston already form one of the most lethal combinations in basketball when both are healthy, and they've proven it repeatedly. Kelsey Mitchell remains an incredibly efficient scorer in the WNBA. The roster had firepower. The roster had scoring. The roster had playmaking. But there was something deeper that kept surfacing, something that showed up in game after game throughout the season. Opposing teams had created an easy blueprint. It was simple and it was effective. Play physical with Caitlin Clark, hit her hard, do it consistently throughout the entire game, keep repeating it until the officials finally whistle a foul or she wears down from the constant contact. That was the formula. And the really troubling part was that there were no real repercussions for teams that followed it. Nobody in Indiana's front line was big enough to make opponents pay a price. Nobody was aggressive enough. Nobody was quick enough to make teams regret their approach. So opponents kept doing it, game after game, knowing they could get away with it. The front office recognized this vulnerability clearly, and they understood exactly what it meant. They weren't going to solve it by trading for another scoring option or bringing in more offensive firepower. They needed someone who could change the fundamental dynamic of how opposing teams approached Indiana. Someone with a reputation that preceded her. Someone with the mentality and toughness to make opponents think twice before employing that physical blueprint. That's why they brought in Maisha Hines Allen. This wasn't a generic roster addition. This wasn't a depth piece that they threw together hoping it might help. This was a targeted, surgical remedy for a very specific vulnerability that was costing them games and potentially putting their franchise player at risk. The front office diagnosed the problem, identified the solution, and executed the move. It was management working at the highest level, solving a problem that casual observers might not even recognize as a problem. The matchup against the Valkyries provided the loudest evidence possible that management diagnosed this issue perfectly. Within one game, within one moment actually, the entire premise of what Hines Allen was brought in to do became crystal clear to everyone. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was live, real-time confirmation that the front office understood exactly what they were doing. This becomes even more critically important when you factor in the current season and what's at stake for Indiana. The Fever simply cannot afford to lose Caitlin Clark to further health issues. Last year, the basketball world watched her push through a quad injury and a groin issue that kept her sidelined for a notable stretch of time. When she went down, even temporarily, the entire league witnessed what Indiana looked like without her on the floor. The entire offensive flow shifts. The spacing disappears. The gravity that she creates with her shooting ability vanishes. Even Aaliyah Boston's efficiency drops noticeably because defenses can clog the paint without fearing that Clark is going to hit shots from deep range. So safeguarding Caitlin Clark making sure she stays healthy and available throughout the season, isn't just about team loyalty or proving that this franchise has grit. It's about protecting the ultimate potential and championship aspirations of the entire organization. Every unnecessary blow she takes, every time she gets fouled without the refs calling it, every time she gets physically exhausted by opponents playing overly aggressive defense, all of that is a massive gamble on Indiana's championship dreams. It's risking the core asset that this entire franchise is built around. Maisha Hines Allen minimizes that danger in a way that will never show up on a standard stat sheet. You won't see it in box scores. It won't appear in her individual statistics, but it's one of the most valuable things she provides. When opponents know they have to deal with her if they target Clark, they become more careful. They become more calculated. They become less willing to employ that physical blueprint because the cost has increased substantially. That's defense working at its highest level, even if it doesn't look traditional. Think about it from an organizational perspective. Indiana invested resources into fixing a problem that most casual fans wouldn't even frame as a problem. They weren't trying to win a championship through a flashy trade or signing some marquee free agent. They were being strategic. They were being smart. They were solving an actual weakness that had been exposed in their roster. And when you have a front office that's thinking that clearly, that's paying attention to details that others miss. That's willing to make a move specifically designed to address a vulnerability. That's the hallmark of an organization that knows what it's doing. The Golden State game showed everyone exactly what management had envisioned. It showed that the move wasn't just about adding another body. It was about changing the entire dynamic of how other teams could approach Indiana. And that's something that will pay dividends throughout the entire season, in ways both obvious and subtle. What happened after that game concluded might have been even more revealing than what happened on the court during those 40 minutes. In what turned out to be perhaps the most telling moment of the entire night, Tiffany Hayes was picked up by a live microphone, and what she said essentially amounted to a confession. Hayes essentially admitted that the style of officiating was the only thing preventing Caitlin Clark from putting up an even more massive, even more dominant statistical performance. Hayes remarked, to paraphrase her words directly, that if the referees had actually whistled the infractions they were supposed to call according to the rulebook, Clark would have completely torn them apart even worse than she already did. Stop and sit with that for a moment. An opposing player, immediately after spending the entire game trying to physically bully the league's most talented young superstar, is openly admitting on a hot microphone that their game plan only partially worked because the officials allowed them to cross the line. That isn't standard competitive trash talk or typical post-game banter between opponents. That is a straightforward confession about what was actually happening on the court. That is one player essentially saying, "We were getting away with things we shouldn't have been getting away with." It perfectly illustrates why fans have lost their patience with how women's basketball is being officiated. The inconsistency is documented. The inability or unwillingness to call physical fouls consistently is something that players themselves are acknowledging publicly. When an opposing player is admitting that your star would have dominated even more if the refs had done their job correctly, that's not compliment territory. That's an indictment of how the game is being managed. Caitlin Clark herself approached the post-game press conference with the same calm maturity and professionalism she demonstrates in almost every situation, which often makes you forget she is still one of the youngest stars in the entire sport. She acknowledged that fines were coming her way because of the technical fouls and the physical altercation. She made a joke about the flagrant foul she received late in the game for delivering a hard screen on Veronica Burton, estimated the financial penalty at around $1,000, and simply turned the page. She noted that the contest was highly physical, mentioned that the officials missed several calls throughout the game, and deliberately declined to stretch it into some massive complaint or use it as an excuse for the outcome. She didn't try to build a narrative around the officiating. She didn't make it about herself or try to get sympathy. She just acknowledged what happened, acknowledged what could have been called differently, and moved on to the next thing. That's a level of maturity from a young player that you don't see very often. That technical foul she received, by the way, marked her second of the season. Her first one came back in May against the Los Angeles Sparks, which means she's being called for technical fouls at a rate that's concerning for someone who isn't known for being a complainer or someone who argues with officials constantly. Clark has discovered the hard way that her comments are amplified far more than anyone else's in the league. Her words get picked apart. Her actions get scrutinized. So she has deliberately opted to let her performance on the court and let her teammates handle most of the talking and responding to situations. This is exactly why having an enforcer like Maisha Hines Allen protecting her is so vitally important to Indiana's formula. Clark doesn't have to be the one to stand up physically when things get rough. She doesn't have to be the one wading into confrontations and potentially getting herself in foul trouble or technical trouble. She can focus entirely on playing basketball at the highest level while someone else handles the physical side of standing up for the team. It's a perfect division of labor. There's also a roster planning and salary cap component to this strategy that doesn't get nearly enough attention from most analysts. Indiana signed Maisha Hines Allen to a simple one-year agreement, and that was completely intentional on the front office's part. They weren't trying to lock her into a long-term deal. They weren't trying to commit significant salary cap space for multiple years. They were making a calculated decision about the timeline of this team. The front office is carefully maintaining salary cap flexibility for the upcoming offseason when a wave of major player contracts and upcoming CBA adjustments could completely alter the entire landscape of the league. By adding a championship-proven veteran on a short-term, high-value contract, the Fever can contend for a title right now, in this moment, while simultaneously protecting the financial room and flexibility needed to pursue a third star down the road when the opportunity presents itself. It is the exact type of strategic move that well-run organizations execute and that struggling franchises completely miss. It's the difference between thinking short-term and thinking strategically across multiple seasons. And it's a major reason why so many national commentators have raised their championship projections for Indiana this year. They're recognizing that this isn't just a talented young team anymore. This is a smartly constructed roster built by a front office that understands both basketball and business. That kind of organizational clarity usually leads to winning. What truly stands out when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture is the fundamental transformation in team culture that this acquisition represents and symbolizes. For several years, the narrative surrounding the Indiana Fever centered almost entirely on future potential. The story was about youth and development and waiting patiently for all the young pieces to develop and mature into their full potential. The patience narrative, the long-term build narrative, the trust the process narrative. That era is officially over. This organization is done waiting. Think about what they've assembled. They drafted Caitlin Clark, a once-in-a-generation guard who immediately changed the conversation around women's basketball in this country. They anchored their interior defense around Aaliyah Boston, a former Rookie of the Year who provides elite rim protection and interior defense that doesn't get enough credit. They brought in Sophie Cunningham, one of the sport's most confident and charismatic personalities, someone who isn't intimidated by anything or anyone. And then, the final piece, they secured a veteran protector in Maisha Hines Allen specifically to ensure that this team won't be bullied by anyone anymore. That isn't a long-term rebuild. That isn't a development project. That is a legitimate championship contender establishing itself in real time, right in front of the basketball world. The Golden State matchup, as chaotic and confrontational as it looked on the surface, might be the exact moment that people point to down the road as the turning point, where the rest of the league had to view Indiana not just as an entertaining story or a feel-good narrative, but as a genuine, serious threat to everyone else's championship aspirations. There is one additional element to all of this that often gets completely missed by analysts and commentators, and it relates to what this level of resilience and toughness actually means for the younger generation of players watching from home right now. Young girls across the nation are observing Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Sophie Cunningham, and Maisha Hines Allen competing at the absolute highest level. What they are witnessing is a group of athletes who refuse to be pushed around, who actively protect one another without hesitation, and who command the court like they own it. That carries weight. That matters. The WNBA has spent decades striving for the level of visibility and national attention that women's professional basketball currently enjoys. The league has fought for relevance, fought for media coverage, fought for sponsorship deals, fought for television time. And the way these athletes carry themselves under intense pressure and in difficult moments is a driving force behind the continued growth of the sport. It's not just about the scoring or the highlights. It's about the narrative. Maisha Hines Allen rushing into that skirmish wasn't just a standard basketball play that happened to get caught on camera. It was a powerful, unmistakable demonstration of what it looks like when women protect one another at the absolute highest level of professional sports. It was a statement about solidarity. It was a statement about not tolerating disrespect. It was a statement about having each other's backs unconditionally. And that message carries weight far beyond any individual box score or game result. When young players are watching and they see their role models standing up for one another without hesitation, when they see women in professional sports refusing to accept mistreatment, when they see a team that has each other's backs, that becomes part of their understanding of what strength and leadership look like. That becomes part of their internal framework for how they should carry themselves when they reach that level. The cultural significance of this moment extends beyond basketball. It speaks to representation. It speaks to visibility. It speaks to the normalization of women protecting and supporting one another in high-pressure competitive environments. These aren't just athletes. They're role models for millions of young people watching. The Fever's transformation from a future project to a present threat also sends a message to the rest of the league. It says that Indiana's front office is done experimenting. They're done building slowly. They're done waiting for the perfect opportunity. They've identified their window, they've made their moves, and they're coming for championships now. Other teams have to adjust their approaches. Other franchises have to recognize that Indiana is no longer a team they can bully or take lightly. This is what organizational clarity looks like. This is what happens when a front office understands both its assets and its needs. This is what happens when management makes intentional, strategic moves designed to address specific vulnerabilities rather than just adding names to a roster. Indiana has done exactly that, and the rest of the WNBA had to take notice the moment Maisha Hines Allen charged into that situation. The cultural shift isn't just about one player or one moment. It's about the entire identity of the franchise changing from wait and see to we're here now. That's a massive shift, and the Valkyries game served as the public announcement of that change. So where does this position the Indiana Fever for the remainder of the schedule and moving forward into the playoffs? The answer is pretty straightforward. They find themselves in the absolute best competitive shape they have been in since the franchise captured its championship back in 2012. That's not hyperbole. That's an actual assessment of roster construction and organizational positioning. Let's break down what they have. They feature the league's most popular icon directing the offense in Caitlin Clark, someone who generates attention every single time she steps on the court, who changes how defenses have to operate, and who has the offensive skill set to create opportunities for everyone around her. She's not just a star. She's the franchise cornerstone. They have a former #1 draft pick anchoring their interior defense in Aaliyah Boston, someone who provides elite rim protection, who can match up with anyone in the post, and whose defensive presence forces opponents to think twice about attacking the paint. She's the foundation that everything else is built on. They have Sophie Cunningham functioning as a veteran protector and emotional leader, someone who brings swagger and confidence to the team, someone who isn't afraid to call out what's happening and hold people accountable. She's the personality that energizes the locker room. They have a secondary unit that finally possesses the personality and grit required not just to compete in the playoffs, but to advance through multiple rounds. For the first time in a very long stretch, the Fever roster has the kind of depth and character that suggests they're built for deep playoff runs. They're not just hoping for the best. They're constructed to withstand adversity. The only remaining uncertainties that could derail Indiana's championship aspirations center on a few specific factors. First is staying healthy. Caitlin Clark's injury history, while not catastrophic, is something that everyone in the organization is aware of. They need her available and performing at a high level throughout the season. Second is figuring out the rotation when everyone is completely available. The Fever have enough talent and depth now that the coaching staff will face decisions about who plays and when, and getting that balance right could be the difference between a good season and a great one. Third is whether the officiating will finally adjust to address the physical tactics that opponents have been throwing at Indiana. This is something the league needs to address at a broader level, not just for Indiana's benefit, but for the integrity of the game. When players are getting away with holding, jersey pulling, and body checking consistently, it changes the game. It slows down the pace of play. It favors the more physical team over the more skilled team. The league has an opportunity to elevate the quality of play and the quality of the officiating simultaneously. But here's what's genuinely different about this Fever team compared to previous versions. They're not playing with fear anymore. There's no anxiety about facing tough opponents. There's no hesitation about standing up to physical teams. There's no waiting and hoping. They're competing like a squad that understands its identity, knows its ultimate goals clearly, and knows exactly who is standing in their corner when the game gets physical and intense. That confidence is contagious. It affects everything from how they execute plays to how they respond to adversity during games. When you have players who believe in each other, who trust that they have each other's backs, who know they're not going to be bullied, that changes how you play. That changes how you compete. That changes your entire approach to basketball. The Fever aren't a team that's hoping to make a run anymore. They're a team that's expecting to make a run. That's a subtle but massive difference in mentality. Expectation changes behavior. When you expect to win, you prepare differently. You compete differently. You handle pressure differently. Moving forward, Indiana's path is relatively clear. They need to stay healthy. They need to continue developing chemistry among this new configuration of players. They need to figure out how to maximize the impact of their bench and role players in crucial moments. And they need to maintain this cultural shift that they've established. The understanding that physicality, toughness, and protecting each other is just as important as scoring and playmaking. If they can do all of those things, if they can keep everyone on the court and healthy, if they can continue to play with this level of confidence and grit, then the Fever have legitimate championship aspirations. Not pie-in-the-sky hopes, not maybe if everything goes perfectly scenarios. Legitimate, credible paths to a championship. That's where the Maisha Hines Allen signing has positioned them. That's what management understood when they made that move. They weren't just adding another player. They were fundamentally changing the identity of this franchise and making a statement about where they believe this team can go. The rest of the league heard that message loud and clear during that Valkyries game. The Indiana Fever have officially arrived as contenders, and it started with one moment when Maisha Hines Allen decided that her team wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. This is more than basketball. This is about organizational vision, roster construction, and creating a culture where players protect each other. The front office solved a problem most people didn't even see, and now everyone has to respect it. Here's what I want to know from you. With everything this team has assembled, do you think Caitlin Clark finally claims the MVP award this year? Can the Fever actually make a legitimate run all the way to the finals? Or is there another contender you believe has a stronger path? Leave your boldest predictions in the comments below, because I read every single one of them, and this channel genuinely has the most knowledgeable WNBA fans online. If you made it all the way through this breakdown, hit that subscribe button right now. We're breaking down every strategic move, every roster decision, and every game that matters for the Fever all season long. Keep watching the games, keep analyzing the plays, and keep supporting these athletes who truly earn everything they accomplish. This is just the beginning.